Okay. And now I have worked up to the main attraction, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a boxing match because you're already knocked out by this guy. This is my man, Mr. Joe Henderson. From the first note I heard him play, he was my favorite from the, probably late 60s until this very day. Now, Joe's from a little town. Did I say little town? Little town called Lima, Ohio. Maybe Lima, but it's either Lima or Lima. Lima, you'll go figure that out, okay? Now, he was raised in not such a small family. Oh yeah, his mother and father were in love. And in that love, they had 14 children. That's a lot of love. 14 children. And a lot of those children were musicians. And to Joel's benefit, he wasn't the oldest, he was one of the youngest. So he had older brothers and sisters to lead him and guide him, and thank God they did not lead him and guide him astray. They loved their brother, and they kind of kept him in the middle of the road. And very early on, they encouraged him with music. When you got 14 kids, there's probably going to be a big age differential between the oldest one and the young one. The oldest brother was already out there in the world hanging out with musicians and listening to jazz and probably running up to Detroit and getting in trouble. By the way, this place, Lima, is halfway between Dayton, Ohio and Toledo, Ohio. So that's where it is. It's in the middle of the country, in the middle of pretty much nowhere. I worked in Toledo with a drum corps for 10, 11 years. And never one time met anybody from Lima, Ohio. Now, as Joe started developing, his older brother said, well, look, man, you need to learn something about this piano. That's the first smart thing. So they had some local piano players in town, and you got 14 kids, you also ain't got a whole lot of money. So they had friends of the family teach him to play the piano. Yeah. At first he liked the drums. Every kid liked the drums because it's noisy. Don't take much skill to get started. Just hit something and you're ready to go. But Joe was looking for bigger things. He went straight to that piano. And then later, when he settled on drums and then clarinet and bass, and then finally to the saxophone, another brother said, come here, man. If you're going to play the saxophone, you got to listen to Lester Young. Yeah, and you got to listen to Bird, Charlie Parker, and you got to listen to Dexter Gordon, and you got to listen to this and that. And so Joe started practicing the piano and listening to these great saxophones and imitating them. And he kept practicing and getting older and getting better. And he ends up in high school where he had his first saxophone teacher, his high school band director. Got him started the right way, corrected some bad habits and all that kind of stuff. By the time he was 18, Joe was driving all the way to Detroit for jam sessions. Now, I know it's about an hour's drive from Toledo to Detroit, and from his hometown, probably an hour and a half, 2 hours. Especially what roads would have been in that time, because I didn't say this earlier, Joe was born in 1947. So this was probably, been late 50s, very, very early 60s. So he's hanging out with these musicians that come to Detroit from New York City. So he's seeing the truly bad cats, Cannonball Adderley and Dexter and Bird, and those were his models. In high school, he also started arranging and composing. And his band director had him write several arrangements for the high school band. All kinds, marching band stuff, concert band stuff, jazz band stuff. Joe could do it all. He had a secret not many people had discovered at that time. Well, you got to graduate sometime, so he graduated and went to Wayne State University. Very popular college in the Detroit area. Whole lot of musicians go there, just about everybody you name. Matter of fact, he had Yusuf Lateef in his college classes, the great Barry Harris, who was a mentor to one of my students, Kendrick McAllister, who's touring with Samara Joy these days. Barry Harris tutored him after he left St. Pete and moved up to New York. So this legacy continues. We jazz musicians, as I was just discussing, we tend to pass it on to the next generation. We are simply bridge builders. And we just build a bridge that the next generation can walk across to higher ground. Now, after being in college with those kind of people, for some reason, he found a need to leave and go to Kentucky State. And I found that unusual. What is Kentucky State? I hadn't ever heard of it. I'm from Florida A&M. I know that's a HBCU. What is Kentucky State? So I went and looked it up, and it was first called Kentucky State School for Negroes. I'll say, I got it. What he did was he went and got a little bit deeper into the African American culture by going to an HBCU before that was possible. Somehow, once he transferred from Wayne in Detroit and went all the way down to Kentucky, he was discovered by his elective service. And they cut his time at Kentucky real short by drafting him. And he could play though. So he took his horn with him. And first place he went, he won a talent contest. That means he gets some gigs. So he ain't out there with that, what I call the ignorant stick, shooting at stuff. He out there playing his horn. That's how he get over. And finally he left, I think, Fort Belfour or Bel Air and went to Fort Benning. And they were holding auditions for a world tour. And of course, Joe, he wasn't scared of nothing. So he went to that audition. And next thing you know, he's traveling the world, entertaining servicemen. And he ends up in Paris with what we will call jazz expatriates. These are mostly black jazz musicians have gone to Europe and discovered something that they had not yet discovered in America: freedom. And they didn't want to give it up, so they stayed there. And one of the guys has a local connection. The great Kenny Drew was there. And he met Joe in Paris. And then the other Kenny Clark, who we all call Kook, great drummer, one of the pioneers, he lived there too. And these two brothers, they never came back to America. Kenny, of course, had a son named Kenny Drew Jr., who graced stages of this area all the time because he actually lived in St. Pete and was a great musician and a great teacher, but a tortured soul like a lot of jazz musicians tend to be. So after having that experience, after that tour, they sent him back to the United States to Maryland. Maryland is the South, and Joe, having grown up in the North, even though it was Detroit, wasn't all that free in Detroit either, it was better than Maryland. So Joe had to get out of there. And he decided, okay, it is time for me to make this move. What move? I'm going to New York City. And I'm either going to hit a home run or I'm going to strike out. Well, he gets to New York and he meets the great trumpeter, Kenny Dorham. And Kenny starts showing him around New York. He tries, look here, man, I ain't going to let you mess up. These boys that are into these drugs and stuff like that, I'm going to keep you away from them. I'm going to keep you away from all unscrupulous people. Let's just do it that way. You come with me and we'll go to places. So they would go to Junior Cook, great jazz saxophone player. They go to his apartment and hang out and just talk and invite people who were safe people. And one night, they decide they go out to Birdland and hear the great Dexter Gordon play. Now, Dexter had been one of the legends that Joe had worshipped as a child. So you think he goes to the club and there is Dex in the flesh, and he sits there, he'd be petrified, frozen like a rock. But Dex goes, hey, come on up here and play. And Joe, of course, jumped straight up, ran straight up on the stage, turned off a tune with Dexter's rhythm section, and almost scared Dexter to death. Dexter's like, oh my God, this guy can actually play. Yeah, welcome to New York. Soon after that, the word got around, man, this young cat almost blew Dex off the stage. So now Joe's getting some work. And he ain't getting little work, he getting big work. Blue Note Records. Blue Note Records. Are you kidding me? Blue Note alone, over 100 recordings. With everybody who was anybody, from Kenny Dorham to you name it, Joe recorded with him. Because everybody wanted a piece of Joe. One of my favorite albums is called Unity, by an organ player most people don't know, Larry Young. And man, one of my favorite albums. I was so in love with Joe Henderson that I traded a friend of mine named Jack Todd, blind sax player, organ player I met up north. He loved Dexter Gordon. And I had a Dexter Gordon album that was out of print and he wanted it so bad. Dex was all dapped out with his black hat and black shirt and was called the Cat. Oh yeah, Dex looked the real thing. He wanted it so bad. And so I said, yeah, I might trade it for you, but I will only trade it for that album right there, Unity. Oh my God. With Elvin Jones and Larry Young. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so he traded with me. And I didn't discover that I didn't have that album until I think about 2 months ago, when one of my sons came home and I was looking for it, and he said, Dad, it ain't there. I said, what you mean it's not here? He said, I took that thing 20 years ago. I said, oh my God, so there you go. Even my sons love Joe Henderson, and they are both professional jazz musicians, probably because they listen to the great Joe Henderson. Now, I could talk about all of his recordings, I think 150 or so. I think about 50 under his own name, many collaborations and this and that. So he had his own groups and he did his own thing, but he was in such demand as a sideman that he did 3 times as many albums with other people as a sideman as he did for himself. He was also a very kind person. One of my younger sons met him at his home in San Francisco. It was actually on the Hill in Berkeley. And they were just jamming and having a good time. And he said Joe was one of the kindest, most elegant gentlemen he'd ever met. Soft-spoken, easy, and that made me feel good. because that's what I get when I listen to a ballad played by Joe. But Joe can bring the fire. And Joe was not a snob. He played straight ahead. He played bop. He played hard bop. He would play fusion. He didn't mind electronics. He didn't mind electric guitars and all that. But he always came back to the source. Later on, with Art Farmer, he had the jazz head, I think. And then he also had a big band that recorded several things like 45 years ago. And that big band album, because of marketing and what jazz is and the rock and roll and the fusion and the smooth jazz and all of that, that album did not get released for 30 years. But when it did, it immediately won a Grammy. So you got to do something about getting more jazz out there. And I'm sure Joe would agree with that statement. Yeah, he was an NEA master. At some point, he got tired of New York. And believe this or not, because he wasn't a snob, he played with Blood, Sweat, and Tears for a while. And Blood, Sweat, and Tears at that time was based in San Francisco. And he went out there and started because of, number one, them, and because his record company at that time was Fantasy, and they were based there. And he wanted to be close to his record company so he could control his product a little better. So he broke his contract with Red by recording 3 albums in 1 year to end that contract, and then went on and started doing what he wanted to in California. He never left San Francisco. He loved it. He did a lot of recordings there in studios, did a lot of great music with Fantasy. All I can tell you is this: Mode for Joe. You got to go hear it. His earlier stuff, Page One. Got to hear that. And here's something I think is important to know about Joe and his heart and why his music is so great. He was a great human being. In his first album, he dedicated it to his family. And in his own words, he said, "I'm dedicating this to my family who was so tolerant and patient with me when I was in my formative years and didn't sound quite like this." I love Joe Henderson. I love his music. I love his spirit. If there is any one musician who I think exemplifies the spirit of real modern jazz, it's Joe Henderson. Now, Joe was a chain smoker, as a whole lot of people were back in those days, didn't know any better. And he got sick. A lot of young lung problems, influenza and whatnot. And so he died at his home in San Francisco at the age of 64. And the jazz world lost a gentle giant. Some of the last projects he did while in San Francisco were tributes to other great giants. Starting with Lush Life, the music of Duke Ellington. Of course, we all know that Lush Life was written by Billy Strayhorn, but Billy contributed to Ellington's library. We all know that too. And Lush Life, the title tune, is a duet between Joe and Christian McBride on the bass. If you don't listen to anything else but that, go find that first tribute album and listen to what Joe and Christian McBride do with this tune, Lush Life, and how they complement and interplay with each other. The conversation is clearer than what they could have if they were speaking their native tongues. And then a dedication to Miles Davis, and then a reworking of Porgy and Bess in the jazz way, and then a tribute to Chick Corea, because Chick's everywhere, and he had to have a piece of Joe too. Go check out Joe. You will be richly blessed for it, and your ears will be dancing on the side of your head. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this. My man, Joe Henderson.